So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. Welcome to the third webinar on All In, a revolutionary theory to stop climate collapse book. This webinar is called A Revolutionary Movement as the Handbrake to Stop Climate Collapse, with the subtitle System Change, Climate Deadlines, and Filling the Ambition Gap in Our Movements. So just to give you some context, this is the third of a series of 6 webinars organized around the 6 propositions of the All-in Revolutionary Theory to Stop Climate Collapse book, written by comrades Sinan Eden, who is here, and Mariana Rodrigues. So we did the first webinar on the first proposition, a global business, around the need to organize a global and international level at a global and at international level, facing ever more globalized capital. So that was around a month ago. And we also did a second one on the second proposition on a class business, on the need to organize then a global working class for this system change task. And you can watch them in the YouTube channel of All In. Yeah, and in this webinar, we will be focusing on the third proposition of the book, which is building a movement for rupture. So with a globalized capitalist system to dismantle under tight deadlines dictated by the climate emergency that we are in, we need an ever more consequential attitude. So how do we envision social change taking place? What transformative strategies are adequate for such a change? What kind of strategy and organization do we need to achieve that transformation? So this webinar is about building a movement that can have a chance to change everything and building it before everything changes. I'm Matilde. I will be moderating this webinar today. I am a climate justice organizer based in Lisbon, Portugal. I'm a militant in Climáximo and have been doing some international work in the climate justice movement for a couple of years now. And with me today to explore these questions and give perspective, we have Onur Yilmaz, who is involved in the socialist movement since he stepped into organizing life by joining the student movement before the Gezi uprising. And since 2020, he has been part of Pollen Ecology Collective in Turkey with an organizing role. So hi, Onur, thanks for joining us in today. We have Lachlan Ayles, the strategic and lead at Humanity Project and sits in the core team for Assemble UK. He previously organized in the climate civil resistance space for Just Stop Oil and now focuses on building democratic political alternatives in the form of popular assemblies. Hi, Lachlan. Thanks for joining in today. And Inês Teles, a Portuguese climate justice activist based in Lisbon, active with Climáximo, and also likes to foster connection with other social justice and community groups in the Lisbon area. And she also works at Stay Grounded and has a soft spot for nagging the aviation industry. Thank you and welcome and thank you for accepting the invitation to participate. And with us, we also have Sinan, co-author of the book and organizer in Climáximo as well. Yeah, and before we start, I wanted to pass the word to Sinan and say a few words. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. I'm very glad to see all of your faces here. Just to give a basic, more structural context on what's going on. So as Matilde was saying, we did the 2 webinars, the 2 webinars, each corresponding to a proposition. There are a total of 6 in the book. The last 4, so this one and the remaining ones are a bit more practical. They come from a sort of organizational model that we propose as looking at the movement ecosystem in a way that is a bit more intentional than just descriptive. And while we move on to this more implementation part of this book, we are also engaging more and more organizers and activists and different lead roles from different groups to take on the lead, have this conversation together, because we use the book as a tool. This is we consider this as an organizer's tool anyway. So as this process is happening, we're also kind of, myself and Mariana, we're also kind of slowly stepping back, leaving space for other voices and other experiences to fill in the actual contents of the book. So this is a kickoff of the remaining sessions, which will have much more presence of other people than myself and Mariana. So, and this one we start with models of transformation, and so this is where we are coming from. And I'll just basically, because we wrote the book, we had a couple of webinars. We talked too much already in our way. Like I think there's more input coming from the entirety of the movement that is a bit more interesting. And enjoy the webinar. Matilde, back to you.
Yeah, thanks for this intro. So yeah, as I was saying, we'll be focusing on this third proposition of the book, building a movement for rupture. And I want to maybe to just give some also some thoughts and some introduction before passing to our speakers today. So as it's also in the book, rupture was not necessarily like a starting point. Rather, it was more of a point we reach as we struggle collectively. And maybe I wanted to share like more input from myself that I was thinking while preparing this. So I've been to quite a few international strategy conferences over the past few years, organized by very different movements in very different places and very different contexts. And in some of them, I found some people and some groups who talked a lot about revolution, but oftentimes didn't really see it as possible within their own lifetimes, let alone climate deadlines. Other times the word revolution was used quite a lot, but there was not really a clear idea among the people using it on what was it, like a common idea. And I've also found a lot of groups had some quite different ideas, and I think this is also an experience that many of us also have, finding groups that have quite different ideas on what the strategy to stop climate collapse actually should be. Some groups insisting in negotiating with institutions, for example, other groups going for more outside the system approach. And I think what I was reflecting when I was thinking about this webinar is I cannot count the times that I've came out of a strategy meeting, conference, forum, and no serious or consequent conclusion has been reached. And simply it was called as let's leave it as a diversity of strategies in the room. And I think this has created quite some frustration and confusion, especially in the climate justice movement. So giving this more personal reflection on building this movement for rupture, today we want to be exploring how we envision deep social change taking place and which transformative strategies are adequate for such urgent system change according to the climate deadlines that we currently have, as well as what kinds of strategy and organization we need to achieve that transformation. So one of the ways that we can divide and split movements that's also in this proposition in the book is a theoretical split, right? On the analysis on models of transformation, or quote about our analysis of how societies function and change, how history develops, and what the state means. So we reach different models of transformation, which is a term borrowed from Eric Olin Wright's Envisioning Real Utopia's book. And the model goes more or less as follows. So there's the ruptural model, who focus on direct confrontation with the state and the bourgeoisie. And one example could be the Bolshevik Revolution. There's the outside of the system model, which is about building alternatives at the margin of the system. And you can also speak of two variants, so a more evolutionary approach and a more revolutionary approach. And one example could be the utopian socialists of the 19th centuries, or more recently, the squatting movement. And lastly, we have the inside the system model, which focuses mostly on negotiating with the status quo. And an example of these are trade unions or social democratic parties. So I guess a lot of the confusion that I was referring to earlier from my own personal experience is that we're not really having some honest and rooted conversations among ourselves about these models of transformation. And sometimes what is described as like diversity of strategies within a unity of movement can actually be various entities operating in like completely different frameworks. And what the book is proposing, and what I wanted also to bring here for us to discuss in this webinar, is that in times of climate emergency, we need a more consequential approach. So we need to choose our transformational model and invest in it, and use the other ones only as complementary to a strategy, a defined strategy, rather not an abstract one. So which one? And what we're arguing here, and also why we brought these speakers from different organizational backgrounds, is that we need a ruptural movement. So the model of transformation we should invest in should be rupture. And we are saying that because the inside the system plans are not really compatible with urgency. And to see that, we can only look at the COPs so far to understand that it's not really working. So it's not compatible with the urgency that the climate deadlines gives us. And the outside the system approach is really not possible to organize for power in a very international way, in the way that was described also in the previous webinars, right? In that the task being global. So the thing about the climate crisis, and what's also arguing in the book, is that it screams for a revolution. And as freaked out as we can be by this sometimes, it does gives us an urgent deadline to actually do it. So more concretely, we need to reach zero carbon emissions by 2050 globally, which means in the global north, for example, where me, Inês, and Lachlan are standing, we need to have zero emissions and dismantle the fossil economy by 2030, which is rather a short time, right? And then we need other industrialized countries, for example, Turkey or Brazil, to also achieve this goal by 2040. And by the end of that decade, only very few countries should be able to have emissions. So we have a quite tight deadline. And the argument here is that we need to invest in a transformative strategy that might actually have a chance at winning, and that will be nothing short of a rupture with the state of revolution. So we need to create, to focus, and to give our energy to creating a movement ecosystem that agrees on the ruptural model of transformation. Otherwise, we are going to lose this. And of course, there are so many questions, right? Like, how do we build that movement ecosystem? Maybe we'll look around and we're like, okay, maybe here in the global north, that doesn't really exist yet. So how do we even start? Like, how do we build that movement ecosystem? What kind of organization do we need, right? So yeah, I just wanted to lay a bit the cards on the table. I'm not saying anything new, just doing a bit of a wrap up of the proposal in the book. And yeah, I wanted to first pass to Onur to hear his thoughts and his take on this question. So Onur, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matilde, and hello, everyone. Nice to see all of you here. I mean, of course, these are big questions, but we need to find the right answers, as Matilde said. Of course, one of the questions like how to envision such a social change. Envisioning such a world historical magnitude event is, I mean, the overthrow of capitalism, even in one country, requires taking into account countless factors at the same time, like a concrete analysis of the concrete situation, as it is known. But accurate analysis alone also does not ensure the fulfillment of this task, of course, because along with the mature objective and subjective conditions, revolutionary transformations involves critical moments like twists and turns, zigzags, backlashes, and one cannot predict when and how these unfold. So we can only prepare ourselves for them and try to actually ignite these kind of moments to push forward. So first, it's necessary, of course, to correctly address the current functioning of the imperialist capitalism and its crises and its weak points, and work this into the revolutionary strategy, firstly on a national and regional scale. And right there, I think the environmental collapse or catastrophe or climate crisis, whatever we say, is an unprecedented factor now. So, and leaves us with new questions that we need to answer, both in terms of temporal, like, I mean, time constraints, but also in terms of disruption of the ordinary social life. So firstly, I agree the significance of the climate deadlines, for sure, as the book suggests. The climate conditions will change everything, how we live, how we organize, how we struggle, how capitalism itself works. But this is future, either near future or far future. And when we try to understand what we are trying to do, we look back to history, to the lessons, and how similar catastrophes or these kind of like ruptural moments, let's say, occurred and affected, like wars, famines, disasters, and how revolutionary subjects of that time use this kind of moments to create a revolutionary situation and to turn it into an actual revolution. So, but this time, this collapse, of course, will be more global, and the potential revolutionary subjects of this time, the oppressed sections, working class, are wider than ever and more qualified. But also the oppressors are also, let's say, the enemy is also stronger than ever with these huge military industrial complexes, ideological tools, and state apparatuses. So we fight how we fight, adding a fourth dimension, like a temporal time constraint to ourselves. But I hear this call, for a deadline, a call for more of a revolutionary mobilization. It's like a self-promise, a self-made target for us to rate our success. So it's more of a subjective condition for us rather than an objective one. So we see this like a 1.5 degree or 2 degree targets, like a bit more of a political limits, as much as a scientific one, of course. So we accept this call for mobilization, this challenge. But implementing this mobilization is the key question here. Otherwise, the capitalism is the same capitalism, and the contradiction between labor and capital remains the main contradiction. And there are many experiences from 20th centuries, as in the books, the proletarian revolutions, to get rid of capitalism. But the revolutions are the work of the masses, but that for sure, the masses have vanguard and leadership, leading organized forces. The question today is precisely this question, the building of an organization, a revolutionary movement, but also a revolutionary party that will pull the movement to a revolutionary situation, or to prepare the masses for the revolution, then provide a political leadership to the developing mass uprisings, for example. We have seen, as Matilde said, many inconsequential uprisings also in recent years. In all of these, as we see, the whole society wants to get rid of not only this or that party or that government, but they want to change the whole system. That's I think one of the main distinction points of the previous uprisings. This moment, we've seen the whole societies see how rotten the capitalism is and wants to get rid of it. And that's where we find our strength and our implementation of our mobilization call. So, but in all these inconsequential uprisings, what lacks is obviously the political leadership and preparation for such a transformational period. When I mean party, the Revolutionary Party, as the book suggests, a party, a movement as a party can be an understanding, but when I understand the more of like a traditional or classical form of party, of course, this the party today, the Revolutionary Party today, the form of the party, the tactics cannot be exactly the same those of the 20th centuries. Now it's a completely different world, but still some principles remains the same. For example, how to use harmoniously and skillfully all the tools and ways of struggle that is used in the class struggle throughout the history, including the violent ones. Such revolutionary party should prepare themselves for using this kind of tools and methods whenever necessary in relating to their own context, of course. And the organizational structure and the functioning of these parties also does not have to be exactly the same in every country too. It can differ from country to country. There's no strict schema, but like I said, ideological unity, an understanding of internationalism, an understanding of building united fronts in the face of fascism, for example, or for winning partial demands, partial reforms. Building united fronts are necessary qualifications for a long-term revolutionary struggle. I think these kind of parties today exist in some countries like Philippines, India, Turkey and Kurdistan. I can say, of course, Palestine and Colombia. There are parties waging these kind of revolutionary struggles, and they are the ones remaining strongholds of these 200 years of revolutionary struggle, like remaining strongholds. But of course, all of them have shortcomings, failures, but they manage to keep the party line in revolutionary grounds, no matter how they lose, how they fail. And the shortcomings are especially visible in terms of addressing the environmental issues. And that is what we need to focus as this anti-capitalist climate movement from the north or in the south, as we say, needs to complement this revolutionary parties, revolutionary movements with our understanding of how this environmental crisis is the basis of all struggles and will affect how we fight. So for me, today's the defining quality for an internationalism, at least, is not about whether you are like an ideologically you are united, but more of if you are a revolutionary or not. It's not about whether you are a classical Marxist, Marxist-Leninist, Maoist, anarchist, or Trotskyist, or whatever, but whether you are revolutionary in real terms. So I think the problems of a proper practical internationalism arise from here. And I think today Palestine created a great example in this. We see a strong popular solidarity around it, Palestine, and support from all over the world, although not enough to stop the genocide, but peoples of the world support the resilience and fight for liberation of Palestine people, no matter how their ideological differences. It also shows where internationalism is lacking, where it can get stronger. But back to the party as movement idea, I find this approach, this discussion in the book very valuable. And to me, the coordination of different components of a ruptural movement, let's say, a movement ecosystem as a party, does not seem to be very realistic in the if there is no historical background for that. Since these components represent actually different class interests in essence, although they are still ruptural. We can see, for example, this situation in Turkey in the context of Kurdish liberation movement. They have this understanding of ruptural transformation, let's say revolution or national liberation, whatever we say. But if there is no historical background to unite the national liberation movement to the, for example, the working class movement, working class struggle in Turkey, then there will be no like a movement ecosystem as we imagine. There are different movements going on in their own field, and where they can ally temporarily or like short-term action unities. But here in Turkey, I can say we have this kind of united fronts and this kind of movement ecosystem in a successful way in some fields, but unsuccessful, of course, in terms of they couldn't achieve their goal, which is revolution. But continuing the Kurdish liberation struggle today, after fighting for more than 40 years against the second biggest army of NATO, is a bit also still a success in its essence. So Matilde mentioned Gezi during the introduction part, Gezi uprising. So it was also a process in which many people of my generation were politicized and organized. And one of the missing points at that time also is the same, like the inability to integrate the energy of the streets around a political program and the lack of a unified political leadership, at least carrying the minimum demands of the working class and the oppressed sections. So this is felt most at the moments of the rise of mass movements, political leadership. And we see today the current protests, if you follow the last weeks of Turkey, we have the similar situation, although different contexts. The organized social movements weakened a lot in the last decade, and that affects now, for example, how we handle the question of alliances and the priorities. For example, like I said, the Kurdish liberation movement goes on to push for a peace negotiation with the state, while the west of the country, the Turkey side, is on the street. And actually, these moments couldn't manage to this time complete each other well. Of course, because of the last decades, heavy pressure and state terror created the situation, and the fascist regime attacks today much more harshly and openly in relation with the both domestic crisis it has, but also the regional geopolitics of the Middle East, what's going on in Syria and Rojava. So, but as we see, like this movement ecosystem approach, in this kind of crisis situations or revolutionary situations, needs a long historical unification around of different social movements, different political struggles, how our strategy, actually I will come back to that in the end, but another example I will give is Rojava, actually, how we can approach to this kind of revolutionary situation. The popular uprisings in Syria and the subsequent imperialist intervention, created a power vacuum in Rojava, and the party of the Kurdish National Movement there, PYD, an organized force against this situation, read this revolutionary moment correctly and step forward and seize the power. And in the last 13 years, of course, it has experienced many difficulties and problems, but it has managed to preserve its existence at a great cost. So, as Poland Ecology Collective, who claims to aim for a Marxist ecology movement, but still a minor group in that sense in our country, we are deeply rooted in these revolutionary traditions of Turkey and Kurdistan. So we see ourselves as the mass spaces for the revolutionary movement can rise on, for the united revolution of Turkey and Kurdistan. So for now, we mostly have an ideological influence on the environmental movement, let's say, or the labor movement, and the socialist movement in terms of the ecology question, of course. But we believe that our political influence will always be larger than our organizational level and capacity, which for us is more important to lead these movements to more revolutionary line. So I think the experience and the accumulation of the anti-capitalist climate movement in the last years also shows us like valuable lessons, and nothing done was in vain. They are real lessons for today, for the conditions of today's for today's society. We see what lacks in the cadres of these movements, what capacities are missing, and the strategy question, and so on. And with the deadline mobilization call, I think we now start not from the scratch, but from a point where the masses are willing to sacrifice more to reach to victory. So the climate movement, I think in that sense, needs to take deep root in the work class struggles, workers' struggles, and support revolutionary movements, and more than focusing on only energy transitions and local struggles. And mass movements has its own waves. They rise and they die, but the vanguard organizations leading them, they should set the goals, how revolutionary is organized today and what sacrifices are needed today. Unfortunately, we are heading in a future full of possible wars and regional disasters, which builds up its own sharp contradictions and create possibilities for revolutionary reads. So our mission, I think, to raise resilient and skillful cadres to coordinate and strengthen these kind of movements, but also make the sacrifice when necessary, and not to turn ourselves individually and organizationally, or not to turn our organizations as a goal in itself to survive, but to make our organizations a tool to reach the victory to revolution. Yes, so that's for me in the first round.
Thank you, Onur. I didn't know you could react with emojis. But yeah, thank you so much for this intervention. We'll head on to Lachlan, if you want to give your take on this as well. So Onur comes from a more he was explaining the context in Turkey, right? And how there is this united front and that has been struggling for a lot of time, and in some ways has been successful, but in other ways hasn't reached its goals yet. So how do we see things in the global north, right, to build this movement for rupture? And yeah, I'll pass it on to Lachlan. What's your take on these questions that we're addressing here today?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Matilde. And yeah, Onur, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. Lots and lots to think about there. First of all, I just touched on the book. I think it's a great book. It's clearly written for organizers. It's very pragmatic. And that leads me on to say that, you know, I'm also an organizer. So I'm coming at this very much from a point of view of approaching history not as an intellectual exercise, theory not as an intellectual exercise, but something that I can apply in my practice and adapt and refine. And I get the sense that many people on this call are also organizers, so will be familiar with this task. My voice is a bit low, apparently.
I can hear you fine. I think just if you speak on this tone, maybe a little bit higher, I think it's okay. So don't worry.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. I'm in a cafe. Okay, so two things to say to preface what I'm about to say. First of all, I'm going to preface everything I say with I think, rather than we need to, just to give a bit more space to the conversation. If I forget to say, before I say something, I think this, or I feel this, or I sense this might be right, please just assume that's what I'm saying. The second thing is also just to assume that the context which I'm talking about is the UK, right? This is the context in which I'm organizing. Again, if I forget to say this is focused on a UK context, please just assume that. Okay. So I'm going to focus on the three questions. How do we envision social change taking place? Transformative strategies, and what kind of organization strategy and organization. So to start with the first question, how do I envision social change taking place? So for this, I'm going to jump to this quote by Lenin, which I absolutely love, which is that there's decades where nothing happens, then weeks where decades happen, right? And I'm going to extend this further, and I'm going to give a shout out to Stanley, who's on the call. He said something brilliant the other day, which I'm going to repeat word for word, which is that this is the decade where millennia happen, right? So we're going to see, in other words, my opinion, a rapidly accelerating, very fluid social situation over the next 10 years. So massive disruption is already locked in, but at the rate we're going at, we're already at 1.5 degrees. We're going up about 0.4 degrees per decade, which means that by the end of the decade, we're going to be at 2 degrees, give or take. And we know that at 2 degrees, or at least some peer-reviewed science says that at 2 degrees, we're going to have 1 billion people being forcefully displaced, right? And this has massive implications for the global economy, right? And trade. So not least to say for human lives and human suffering. So without doubt, this will touch our society in the UK very, very strongly. And I think the contradictions of capitalism will start to become increasingly more apparent as no doubt fossil fuel companies continue to push for more fossil fuels to be burned, and capital increasingly becomes increasingly dominates labor, right? However, obviously this provides massive opportunities for intervention. At the same time, what we'll see, in my opinion, is the hegemonic bloc will move away from trying to manufacture our consent, very much using the blunt tool of repression, right? So we will be locked up. We will be brutally repressed. But within that, there's going to be a lot of opportunities. Right. Next is what transformative strategies are adequate for such a change. So the models of transformation that are laid out in the book, I think are a really good place to start. I got to say, I haven't read the original text by Eric Olin Wright. And the summary in the book has comradely feedback. It's quite brief, so there were some, I guess, nuances which I wasn't quite sure about. But what I'd say is, like, I agree very broadly that the ruptural strategy is definitely where the main show is at, so to speak. However, I do believe so the inside the system approach, and by that I mean really working on elections and through elections, I think it has a place. So this comes from a place of experience, or personal experience. I guess this is the practice that I'm talking about with Assemble. We were organizing during the elections last year, so we were supporting independent political candidates to develop their mandate, their platform in a democratic way through using popular assemblies, right? And Molly and Stan, who are on this call, know that very well. My experience of working on elections is initially I went in, I was highly suspicious of working within the system of liberal democracy because it's highly flawed, and we all on this call, I'm sure, know that. But what I sort of realized through my practice and at the same time was reading a bit of good old Lenin. Some things became clear, and actually now I believe that it's essential to engage in elections in the UK. So what Lenin said is that they're good for, first of all, counting your numbers so you can see how many people are in your support base. And secondly, it's good for just pushing out your message. It's a good platform for pushing out your message. And I totally agree with that. I found that it's a great place to agitate. What I'd say is I would actually extend what Lenin said and say there's a much more fundamental reason why we should engage in elections. And that's because elections fundamentally move people like no other form of organizing that I've come across before, right? So previous to the election, I was organizing around climate, around direct democracy. I'd ask people, I'd say, have you got time to, do some small bits of work for this campaign? The answer was, yeah, I'm actually very busy. I can't fit it in, with this kind of stuff. As soon as the election came around, people dropped everything. People dropped all of their tools, and they were immediately ready to pick up the shovel and go knocking on doors all day and all night. Not quite all night, exaggeration, but you know what I mean. So for that fundamental reason, I think it's, from my point of view in the UK, this is where people's heads are still at, right? They're still at elections. That's where the power is. And for me, it's important to follow that energy, but it shouldn't be the central piece of our strategy. Furthermore, if we get people into power, we get revolutionaries into power, they can use that platform to agitate, they can use it to disrupt, to highlight the contradictions within the regime, to undermine its legitimacy, and also act as a mouthpiece for this movement as a party, which I'm now going to go on to explain in 5.5 minutes. So where we're at currently in the UK is, this is where I see things. There's lots of social movements, right? All relatively weak compared to where they need to be at, right? And there's even smaller amount of those groups are actually pursuing a ruptural strategy. And there's currently only very few issues that can, and movements that can achieve mass participation. So we've seen big mobilizations around Palestine, around austerity and anti-war, that have achieved kind of over 200,000 people on the streets. But most movements, most issues are managing to mobilize between about 5,000 and 20,000 people, I reckon. That's just back of the envelope calculations there. In any case, what we're seeing is there's little coordination across movements. There's no clear shared vision of the direction we're heading in. And there's also very little anti-capitalist sentiment, relatively. So it's up to us, it's up to the revolutionaries to increase this movement power, right? To increase its force through increasing participation, organization, and the articulation of the movement. So this movement as a party, which is the model you're talking about, it's been written about quite a lot by this guy called James Schneider in the UK. He refers to it as a left bloc. What he says is that this left bloc of movements, of progressive radical movements, could be coordinated by kind of an umbrella organization, right? So this movement as a party can massively increase participation. That's the first thing. So what it can do is coalesce, bring together all of these disparate movements, right? And coordinate actions around like critical issues, right? Critical issues for agitation, right? To say there's like a really big sort of housing issue that comes up, rather than getting 20,000 people on the street, you know, we might be able to get upwards of 200,000 people on the street. We can do this through that coordination at the meta structural level, at that top level through that organization. Secondly, the movement as a party can increase organization within the movement. So we can do activities like movement ecology mapping, which is something Molly and I are going to be doing tomorrow. Some movement ecology mapping within the movement we belong to using a digital tool. The movement as a party can also train up cadres to develop organizational capacity and radicalize within the movement. As I said, that's currently deficient. And develop a shared anti-capitalist vision as well, which is articulation and organization. But what I want to say is, in just over 2 minutes, is that I don't think this is sufficient. First of all, I still don't think this will bring together a big enough base in the UK. You know, this radical bloc under this movement as a party, you know, perhaps 1 million people at most, or 2 million people at most. Again, that's just rough calculations. Furthermore, in order to reach beyond that radical bloc, with very low levels of, high levels of apathy and low levels of trust in the UK. People are very disenfranchised, and that's a product of alienation. So that's one problem. The second problem I see is inevitably this will fall into vanguardism and substitutionism, this umbrella organization, right? And furthermore, I can see that the media will try and drive a wedge between this vanguard and the base as well, but they don't represent you, they're just a bunch of radicals. Third problem I see is disunity. So we're bringing together lots of movements here. It's likely with the current culture that we see in the left, at least how I experience it, is it's been completely invaded by liberalism, right? The liberal kind of culture causes individualism, it causes idealism, it causes pessimism, and this naturally sinks into our movements from the dominant culture. And naturally, these fractures will develop. And I also see that the media will exploit those fractures and try to drive wedges between us. So if it's okay, I'm going to go a little bit over 15 minutes. Sorry about that, guys. I promise I'll shut up after that. But yeah, I'm seeing that there's some potential solutions to these problems that naturally arise. First of all, we need more participation in this movement as a party. And that means making it a more democratic organization. I can see that this, from my point of view, would increase the size of the base by reaching out and bringing in people who have this sense of chronic trust and apathy, by speaking to them and listening to them and letting them also have a voice in the direction of this movement as a party. I can also see that this would stop the disconnection between the vanguard and the base. So making it a more democratic organization would basically create this kind of feedback loop between the base and the vanguard element. And these this organization can be democratized through assemblies, popular assemblies, which is quite a sort of deep participation in the sense that people actually get to spend time talking about the issues. But I think that can also be supplemented with digital participation as well, where people in the movement as a party, members can propose, amend, or vote on different policies or agendas within the movement. Finally, another solution is culture, focusing on culture and doing really strong work on culture. So as Molly and Stan know, I don't stop talking about culture. I think it's super, super important. And I think it's essential for increasing unity within this organization, which is already separate movements. We need to increase the internal unity of that organization and root out liberalism by creating cultures of trust and reciprocity, sharing vulnerability, admitting failures, failing forwards, as you talk about in the book, and articulating a shared vision together. Another project that has just been kicking off, which I'm really excited about, is this work of we're trying to crowdsource a set of agreement and values in the left in the UK to create a kind of new left culture, some consensus about what that new left culture could be, to get away from the quite toxic culture that at least I've experienced before. Okay.
Thank you so much, Lachlan, for this intervention and also for bringing us your perspective as an organizer from the UK. And yeah, to pass on to Inês, I'll maybe go back to something that was said in the beginning, that this ruptural model of transformation was not really the starting point, right? It's something that we're reaching as we struggle. And so what can be a tool that like keeps anchoring us on that rupture, right? On that need to build that ruptural model. And so I wanted to pass to Inês so she can also talk a bit from her experience as an organizer in Climaximo about the war framework, the framework that governments and companies have declared war on the peoples and the planet, and what can this mean for the building of this ruptural movement? Like, what tools that this framework gives us? How does this advance us? Yeah, so just passing over to Inês so she can say a few words about this.
Thank you, Matilde. Hi, everyone. And it's really nice to hear about your experiences and your perspectives, Onur and Lachlan. Yeah, one of the reasons also Matilde invited me, and thanks Matilde, was also because I'm part of Climaximo, and so to give a perspective on this war narrative, and also like bringing also the perspective of having some time of working on an international level, mainly I would say on a European level. And something that really strikes me in doing this kind of international work is I noticed how time kind of seems to move at such different paces in contexts that don't seem that far apart when it comes to the topics that they are actually treating. For example, if we look at NGOs, it often seems like they are kind of stuck in time. They are kind of oscillating through different sort of topics, more kind of content-wise, and exploring some creativeness around narratives, but following more or less like kind of these crystallized strategies and approaches, and kind of acting with no deadlines whatsoever, perhaps except for those set by the funders. On another hand, there's like these more grassroots climate justice groups. And I'm not saying this is like, I'm not painting a picture of everything, but like just maybe of the most frustrating part of the European movement. So these more grassroots climate justice groups who feel the deadlines very strongly and feel like they don't have enough time to act, and try to innovate regularly with like different tactics and different focus topics, different approaches, but seem kind of stuck also within these very constricting boundaries of pressuring governments to try to achieve like some very specific incremental goals. And like within all of this, the question of system change, not climate change, that everyone puts on their flags and everyone keeps saying, seems like kind of a catchy slogan, but not an actual proposition, a true proposition. And I can only say it's very, very, very frustrating to deal with these realities, because even if they are quite different, they both end up like fueling a lot this sense of despair and of depression that I see a lot of comrades going through, and it seems like they cannot get out of that, and it's very hard to see and to experience. So, and as Matilde was saying, I've been in Climaximo for like parallel to this, and sometimes in conjunction to this, for a few years. Of course, we are not at all immune to these issues that other organizations are facing. I think that's important to say. We live like in this very frightening reality that strongly attempts to foster confusion. Everything is overwhelming, fosters conformism, routine, like this kind of defeatist outlook on reality. And this is made to cut short any kind of hope of challenging this destructive system that oppresses us. But time, contrary to these realities that I was describing, time within Climaximo runs really, really, really fast. And what I see, at least from my perspective, I see us trying to do in Climaximo to kind of counter these issues that affect a lot of the movement, is to establish like a culture of agility, of solidarity, of flexibility, honesty, and of responsibility that kind of keeps us from being swollen by these dangerous pitfalls. Since I joined Climaximo some years ago, we've organized like a lot of things. We've organized marches, road blockades, climate jobs campaigns with workers and labor unions. We've spearheaded or sometimes simply joined like wider social justice coalitions, like during COVID. We took direct action at fossil infrastructure and intervened internationally in a lot of processes. A lot took place, a lot changed. Like sometimes we went back and forth. Sometimes it went somewhere new too, but something was always there since the beginning. Like by holding on to a declaration of climate emergency that existed and was updated ever since I was in Climaximo and before I was in Climaximo, inside the organization, we kind of kept this constant process of sometimes even more than once a year, accessing where we are and where the things we are doing are leading us. And this kind of attentiveness to our context, this willingness to adapt and to dare, and our rootedness, of course, in the notion of climate emergency is often very uncomfortable because it keeps challenging you. But I would argue that it is, at least for me personally, as close as someone could get to kind of a cure for this depression and despair, and thus also for this kind of defeatist outlook. And this is what led us closer to ruptural approach, the ruptural approach that is proposed in Alvim. And so, as one of the key pillars, as we were saying, of this approach and of Climaximus' current proposition to itself, the movement, and to society, is this notion that governments and companies have declared war on humanity and the planet. And people might ask, and a lot of people ask, because we're insisting a lot on this, why do you insist so much on this proposition and on getting people to actually accept it? And the answer is that it basically changes everything, and it changes a lot of the things that were being also identified by Lachlan and by Onur before, that are needed for actually having building this ruptural approach. It's the sort of agreement that we really need to have if we want to move forward together in an empowering way, if we want to be able to really build a mass movement to make a revolution. And it has consequences on all levels. On one hand, it basically puts class struggle at the center. It anchors on the fact that stakes have never, ever been higher than they are now. And recenters like this kind of century-old idea that there is a war between the global majority and the rich minority who is consciously and deliberately attacking everyone else and the physical conditions, in this case, to inhabit this planet for the sake of their profits. Then it basically opens up a lot of questions about what this war means, what are the weapons of mass destruction that they are using and pointing at us, and how are we going to stop this war? Our answer within Climaximal is that polluting infrastructures, those causing the most emissions, like airports, like oil refineries, like pipelines, are the actual weapons of mass destruction being used deliberately by governments and companies to bomb us through intensifying climate breakdown. And this leads to the proposal of a political program, something that can also kind of unite different parts, or ideally it can unite different parts of the left and different kind of political subjectivities, and inspire for something new, which we refer to as the disarmament plan and the peace plan. And cutting very shortly, the disarmament plan basically includes two parts: a non-proliferation, which is like to stop anything that can increase the destructive capacity of this system, and that actively contributes to endanger people or to put people in more danger, like stopping all new projects, stopping all evictions and deportations, things like that. And then the second part of the disarmament plan is to actually proceed with reduction, like cross-sectoral plans, like virtually zero aviation, like doing a just transition, etc., ending the military-industrial complex, etc., so that we can actually move forward to cutting the emissions that need to be cut. And then the peace plan kind of imagines like this rebuilding, this rehabilitation, after we are able to cut the destruction that is happening to us, after we are able to dismantle the weapons of mass destruction that are pointed at us, and gives like very general outlines of what we could create and what kind of society based on, with a centered on life and well-being of people, we could create if we actually proceeded with doing what needs to be done right now to stop emissions. One thing that is very important is that these are not demands that we are making. This is presented as what we, as a movement, as common people everywhere and articulated globally, need to build to stop this ongoing war against humanity. And this is a very important point, because if we agree within the movement that governments and companies are conducting an open warfare on everyone in the planet, we sure as hell would be trying to negotiate with these basically genocidal maniacs. So it stands that they are the criminals bombing us, but we, the common people organized across the globe, are responsible for stopping this madness, and thus cannot delegate the responsibility of stopping climate breakdown to institutions or to anyone else. Another level on which this approach operates is in trying to shift the narrative by turning the actual physical reality into a social reality, because climate collapse is happening, but society is acting as if it's not happening and as if everything is quite normal. So one core element is to break this false sense of peace, which we attempt to make through public disruption and shattering this widespread feeling of normality. So the war framing basically challenges us to break free from conformism, from the idea that the struggle goes on indefinitely, this kind of slogan of the left that the struggle goes on, but there are no deadlines or whatever. And from the idea that life can just go on in a normal way while climate is breaking down all around us. We already feel the chaos and confusion all around us, but by opening up in society this notion, we can reach out to population to actually do what they would do if they had a gun pointed at their heads, which they actually have. Inside our organizations, we already know about the deadlines, but we are not acting according to that. So acknowledging that we are in a state of war makes entering a state of climate emergency not only like an optional thing, possibility, but like a necessity, and puts ambition at a much higher level, because what's at stake is actually our survival and the survival and well-being of everyone that we care about. So this allows for a much better prioritization regarding what we do. We are going to have to foster what Lachlan was speaking about, like this shared and common vision within the organization, so that we can operate on a level of agility that the context demands. And this is like very often a problem with, Matilde was also saying, like this kinds of spaces in which it seems like it's all right that everyone has like this kind of different theory of change and let's just live happily with everyone doing their thing. But if we are going to need to operate like in such a flexible and agile way, because the context demands that from us, we have to build these kind of shared visions. And you're going to have to put in march like processes that actively transform and challenge the organization and everyone working on the organization to be able to adapt to these ever-shifting scenarios. And like just to finish, because I've already passed my time, I think, maybe not because Lachlan also did, but to finish, this proposal is not like a rule book or anything. It's, for me, it's like kind of the opening of a door. It's like a door to actually step up and leave behind this kind of depression and despair of years of operating within this framework that is not working. Like a door to leave behind a movement that is doomed by a sense of defeat that doesn't allow it to dream beyond what capitalism actually sets as realism, and that does not allow it to reach for victory, and the door to embark on a new path and experiment with strategies and tactics that really can build the power to challenge and bring down this absolutely insane system that has exploited us for centuries and is now reaching kind of this final heights of endangering the physical conditions that make Earth inhabitable. So as I said, the stakes have never been higher. And so when I hear comrades sometimes saying that there is little to win at current times, I really know that we really, really need to shift gears, because we are living in an historic time in which everything is open. So we need to stand together, we need to put aside disagreements, and we need to accept this task that we are facing with comradeship, with courage, but we need to accept it because, yes, there are a lot of factors that make revolutions more likely, but revolutions do not happen by themselves. They are made by people, and we really, really, really need to do one. And yeah, I'd leave that at that, and very looking forward for questions.
Yay, thank you so much for this intervention. Yeah, so I just wanted to do sort of not a wrap up, but understand if like there's any reactions. And then pass on to yeah, questions and interventions from the people here. So yeah, Onur talked about how like this this revolutionary party cannot be essentially the same as it was in the 20th century, but there are definitely some things to learn, such as, for example, the harmonious interaction between different functions, let's say like this, according also to context. And Lachlan, yeah, you really brought a very methodical list of some advantages, some problems, and some possible solutions for that problem of the movement as a party. And you identified one, for example, being one possible problem being vanguardism, right? And also mentioned on, for example, using some key moments like even within building this ruptural movement, using key moments by the capitalist system, like, for example, elections, which there's still free elections in many countries of the world, as a way to feed the ruptural strategy itself, right? Like inform, you know, like how's the base, like what are people agreeing with, let's say like this. Yeah, and also you were enhancing the need to how can we build a culture of trust within that movement as a party that will be really needed. And I think that Inês developed that with the climate, with the Declaration of Climate Emergency and the war framework on how we can build cultures of like accountability, of trust, but also of like flexibility, of adapting, and how that declaration of climate emergency and that acceptance of this work can really bring out the agility, right, in our organizations that can contribute to creating a proper party culture. So yeah, just wanted to understand if any of you, Onur, Lachlan, Inês, if you wanted to react to anything or just say a few words before we pass on to, yeah, hearing the amazing people who have been with us.
I can add some things actually, what Lachlan and Inês said. Some things that I agree, some additional notes, let's say. I think what Lachlan said about elections actually is kind of important, especially in the, I think, European context, but also in the context of countries like Turkey. I think any ruptural or revolutionary movement or organization, there is no luxury like categorically reject the election as a tool to reach the masses actually. So again, there is always a need to concretely analyze what's going on at that moment and what is that election is going to be about in the conjuncture of that country. So sometimes revolutionary parties in the history boycotted the elections and didn't participate, and that caused them sometimes to become a political position in that period. But sometimes this boycott becomes successful, and sometimes joining a election, like giving concessions to the parliamentarism, blurs ideologically the masses about electoral politics. So these things are a bit related to the ideological strength or the pillars of the organization. If they trust themselves in that sense, their revolutionary roots, I think elections can be like a mobilization periods also. But again, it needs a solid analysis at that moment. And again, revolutionary party is not a monolithic thing. It's like a living organism, I think. It's a collection of different organizations, sub-organizations and sections, and tightly organized around its program and party line, and fed by grassroots and democratically and centrally functioning, and embracing all aspirations and demands of all oppressed sections of the society. So I think the fear about substitutionism is a problem, can be a problem, I think, after the revolution, because the vanguard party already fights for, if it's deeply rooted in the masses and fed by the grassroots, there cannot be an option for a successful revolutionary party for this fear, because the fear of not reaching the masses sometimes it seems like at that point you going against the demands or going against the winds of the masses. But again, it's about, like, for example, similar to the populism discussions going on today about how right-wing and left-wing demands or political discourse sometimes coincide. So I think it's about fighting for the interests of the interests of the working class. What's important. So as long as the interests of the class defines your tactics, I think this kind of fear about detaching from the masses is not a big problem for the long-term struggle. And another thing is about umbrella organizations or united fronts. These things can take different forms. If it is about an anti-fascist front or an anti-colonial or anti-imperialist front, it can take a different one. It can be like a congress or platform or an umbrella party, even for example, to joining an election. But also it can differ in the forms and in the forms of the tools it uses. For example, the democratic front or more of an underground front or like an armed struggle front. And these have also examples today. Yeah, that's what I want to add, actually. What Inês says about honesty and accountability, the cadre level growing up is also important. But the struggle line of the organization, I think, is deciding, shaping the cadres itself. So, and if an organization correctly applies its revolutionary line in the political struggle, the most advanced, most developed sections of the masses will come to that organization eventually. So this kind of cadre honesty or flexibility sometimes is already existent in the masses.
Thank you. So yeah, I think we have some time, maybe some 10-15 minutes before we wrap up. Yeah, to hear if there's any questions, interventions, like reactions. Yeah, so if you can't or don't want to turn on your microphone, just you can also write in the chat and I'll read it out loud. Otherwise, just can just raise your hands and I'll give you the word. Yeah, Stanley, go ahead.
A question for Lucky, actually. So we're talking about you know, we're on the same team, but talking about deadlines in 2030, but you know, inconveniently the next UK general elections in 2029. So does that mean we organize around that kind of social timeline because of the opportunities it creates? Accepting that, you know, I mean, 2030 is, as everyone knows here, incredibly ambitious to win state power, transform the state, and transform the whole of an economy in 5 years. It's like, I mean, I don't know. Hopefully we can do it. But yeah, it's very ambitious. But even so, should we kind of go for 2029, or should we kind of hedge our bets, maybe, or something else?
Lachlan,
Yeah, nice one.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, all good, all good. I've thought about this a little bit, not that much, but a little bit. And I think we have to try, like, this movement as a party needs to try and win the election. Like, there's no other choice at this point. And I think anything less is outrageous. I think it's complete betrayal, to be honest. From what I'm hearing from even the most radical organisers, is ambitions to get a few seats in Parliament, which has 650 seats or something like that, which is not acceptable at this point in history. So yeah, absolutely, we need to throw all our eggs into that basket and be organising outside through this movement as a party structure. Again, I'm slipping into we need to, but like this is just what I think. But we'd also be keen to hear what you think, Stanley.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in our context, that election is really useful, and especially given our kind of use of assemblies, I can see a big opportunity to kind of prepare a movement around a kind of democratically created program before the election, hopefully with acceptance, that can try and basically do something unusual, which is win an election through giant mass mobilization. So where before we had, you know, the big explosive anti-austerity protests, which took loads of people to the streets, and then the left populist projects came off the back of that in Europe and kind of rode off that energy, we instead start with the political project to take state power and then mobilize through the streets in an explosive push, but know that we have to build the alternative institutions through that process as well. That's my kind of vision. And so you're trying to disrupt on the path to the election as well. See what happens. Maybe we can, you know, topple 3 councils next year and cause a vote of no confidence in Starmer, and, you know, everything changes. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And also I think there was some mentioning, I mean, Onur was talking about how like opportunities come, right, for moments that are right, but also Inês complemented with like, we need to, both of you actually, I'm just doing a wrap up, but like we need to actually be ready to grasp them, right? And how climate actually puts up a lot of those opportunities, as well as not only grasp them, but sometimes actually create it. So yeah, is there any more questions or interventions that anyone might have?
I was just going to react to this election thing. Just in a way, like it seems like 4 years still seem like a long time, and I was just going to say that I hope that you can, even if you kind of say, okay, we really want to try to take power in these elections. I would like to see you not kind of moving just so putting everything on this kind of national level reach for power, because it would be really great to foster this kind of articulation that we're saying in the book that is so important in global terms. And I think like such a project could be something that could could be interesting. I mean, I think the important parts around what we are doing is to have like this kind of ruptural mindsets and not imagining that we're going to take power and just reform everything or whatever, which doesn't seem to be what you are aiming at. But if we have the aim to take power on the way to disruption, to like win elections on the way to rupture, that is like kind of something that is valid and that can be interesting. And it's always a question that pops up, like when we are having these conversations in a lot of places, people get a bit confused about if we are kind of saying that we need to do rupture, does that mean that we cannot do this and that and whatever? Like, I think the war framework kind of makes it clear that it's not about not being able to take part in elections or do sort of some tactics or whatever that are traditionally more connected to one of the other theories of changes. It's more like, what are you doing this for? And if you are doing this for actually making a revolution, it's legit. But I hope you can still put like the what was it, like 1/4 of capacity for global articulation, and be flexible regarding everything else that can happen in these 4 years, because I have no idea if these elections will actually happen in 2029. Who knows?
Yeah, thanks for that. So we've been doing this webinar for 1 hour and 40 minutes almost. I would like to wrap it up, unless there's someone that's still any question or some final intervention. We are ready to wrap it up, I think. So thank you so much to everyone here, everyone who was for engaging in this debate, in this honest conversation, not as honest as it can be, because we are online, and in that sense it's harder to there's not as much time and so on, but around the constraints of a webinar, I think it has been a great conversation. Thank you so much to Inês, to Lachlan, and to Onur to have come here and shared their perspectives. And just to maybe come back to what Sinan was saying in the beginning. So we're going to have 3 more webinars, which are more focused on this more operational part of the book. I would invite you as well to, if you want, to get in touch and understand also how we can better develop this movement, this ruptural movement ecosystem building. You can also get in touch with there's an email address that's also on the website. I'll just leave it here as well. There's tons of events being organized with comrades from some countries. So also, if you want to engage in that and really leave this, leave the book sort of as a tool to provoke this debate and to actually build together, and not just like as a book, but really as an opportunity for us to build this ruptural movement ecosystem that can actually grab the task that we have to do. So really encouragingly and strongly inviting you into this adventure. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your evenings, and goodbye.